Welcome to episode 2 of Step Into a Story. We are here tonight with Calvin Johnson. So a little intro on Calvin. Calvin's roots are on the island of Bermuda. His mother, Phyllis, due to financial circumstances, was unable to care for her 2 sons. Grace E. Collins Johnson adopted him. He lived in the city of Stamford, Connecticut. The fun part of his early life was going to the library and selecting books on animals. He especially loved books about a young boy and his horse, the Lee Baird series. He also loved learning about animals. He grew up in Stamford, Connecticut, attending Catholic schools. He went on to graduate from the U of Connecticut, magna cum laude, with a BA in sociology, and then earned his MBA. He decided to write a book in 2017 and is now working on his next book. He has been having strange paranormal experiences since the age of 5, and as a result is fascinated by otherworldly phenomena. So, welcome, Calvin. How are you tonight?
Thank you very much, Laura.
So, tell us a little bit about your first book. It's called Inexplicable Occurrences, My Experiences with the Supernatural, right?
Right.
Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, I think when I decided to do the book, my intention was I no longer wanted to hide the fact that these things occurred in my life. Mm-hmm. Because early on, you don't want to tell anybody about them because you think they're going to think you're crazy.
Yes, and some people do.
But after doing a great deal of research, watching certain movies that I knew were based on fact, I came to the conclusion it's just something that's part of your life. Mm-hmm. And then I was taking a psychological test because I had applied for a particular job in the corporate industry. Mm-hmm. And when I got through taking this test, the psychologist who had done the test, scored it, said to me, he said, "You're a very perceptive person. Mm-hmm. And I think there's an area that you're really off the charts in." And so I said, what area is that? He said, it's the paranormal.
Really?
And I was really surprised that he had picked that up mm-hmm. from my psych test.
Yeah, I didn't know a psych test would pick that up at all.
Yeah, I mean, part of it was the, I think it's the Myers-Briggs psych test that they give you to tell you who you are as a person and how you mm-hmm. function. And we discussed that at length. And he said, my sense of things is you have probably covered this up most of your life. Mm-hmm. And I said, yep. Yeah. But I didn't want my good pals to know that I was like way off the charts.
Right. Seeing things and hearing things.
Yeah, exactly. So, but time has a way of making you more aware of your environment. Mm-hmm. And I think when I had really wanted to do this book before 2017, but by the time I got to that point, my entire feeling about things was, why not?
Right.
You know, you're only telling people about a part of your life that happened. You didn't cause it to happen. It was just there. Mm-hmm. So I started looking into different areas of the paranormal, and I came across people who had similar experiences, and I began to feel very comfortable about
what did you find
sitting down and discussing it.
Right. What did you find was the more common reaction? Did most people tend to say you're crazy, you're imagining things, or did most people say, oh, I'm so glad to hear that because guess what happened to me, sort of thing?
It's the latter.
Okay.
And that really surprised me.
Did it?
You just, you know, it turns out that there were people who had similar experiences, mm-hmm. and they kept kept quiet too, because they didn't want people to think that they were nuts.
Yeah.
So there you go. And that opened the door for me entirely.
Yeah, I bet it did, and I think it's good for them too. But I've actually been reading your book today. I think I'm about 2/3 of the way through. And it was interesting as I read, I was recalling some things that have happened to me that there's really no rational explanation for.
Right.
And I bet a lot of people have experienced that and they dismiss it. Like, I'll tell you one thing. This really came up to me because you were talking several times in your book about these huge gusts of wind and trying to deliver on your bike, and one in particular
Right.
involved a very strong sense of a very malignant sort of being or presence.
Yeah, exactly.
That one really hit me because I had an experience. Now, it wasn't a malignant presence, but I was in church one day, and there was a man praying on his knees, right smack in front of the altar. And this was a man who had just kind of erupted into our church with his family, with all these kids, and the boys were altar boys, and the girls were in the church troop, and the mom was in the young mothers, and they were always on their knees and praying. And so this was this beautiful, calm night in April. Might have been May, I think it was May. And as I'm in church, all of a sudden outside, I heard just this massive wind. I mean, it was like what you were describing. And it was like a freight train, and nobody else was reacting. Like, I was thinking, is there a tornado coming or what? It was so loud. And I finally got up, opened the church door, and the night was absolutely calm and silent outside. And I was thinking about this, a couple of times when you were talking. So I went back to my pew, and I'll be darned if it didn't start again. Just this massive wind. So I looked a second time, and it's perfectly calm every time I open the church door, and this rushing freight train sound. So the next morning, the mom brought her kids for piano lessons. And I said, "Did your husband mention hearing this?" And she said, "No." And she never came for piano lessons again. And I thought, well, that's kind of strange. And lo and behold, it turns out that this man was a professional con man, and he would go from church to church getting very involved, and then he would bilk all the little old ladies out of their life savings.
Oh, okay.
And when I found that out, I went, I think maybe somebody didn't like him pretending in front of the altar. It was wild.
That's not so strange either, because keep in mind, where there's evil, there's also good.
Yes. I like that, yeah.
And we sometimes forget to remember that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, based on this last experience that I had, it started on March 30th of 2018, about 3 months after I had published my book. And the funny thing about this last experience I have, which I'm writing about presently, it didn't make sense to me. I woke up and I was dealing with this high-pitched metallic sound, very high, and it's a kind of noise that's in your head that it hurts. That's how high pitched it was. And so I walked outside, and I could still hear it, but not as much as I could inside my apartment. This is my old apartment. And it continued. And I looked all over, and I couldn't find a source for it, which puzzled me a great deal. And then all of a sudden, the light went on in my mind. And I said, you know what you're dealing with. Now, in Catholic school, elementary, we learned how to say the Mass in Latin. And I figured, I'm going to see if this affects it. Whatever this isn't It's in your head right now. I don't think anybody else can hear this, but it's in your head. So I began saying the Mass in Latin.
Uh-huh.
The intensity of that particular sound, that high-pitched metallic sound, decreased significantly as I began going through the Latin portion of the Mass. And I realized then what I was facing.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised. I've heard that. I've heard priests who are exorcists talk about how they can pray and pray and pray over somebody who's clearly possessed, and it does no good. They start praying in Latin, and boom, it's all over. It's a very interesting fact. So tell us a little bit about this very first room, your mother's room, that you first experienced these things in.
Well, it was my mom and dad's bedroom, actually. And typically what I would do to help out, because back in those days, if you were male or female, you were helping your parents when you were home. And she had just finished a bunch of laundry and folded stuff and put it in one of the laundry baskets, and I had carried it upstairs, and I was putting the laundry in my mom's room, and I put it on the bed, and I was, before I'd even taken out the laundry, I noticed that there was a depression on the back side, of their bed. And it looked like somebody was sitting there. And this is the first time I was in. And I was thinking to myself, that doesn't make sense.
Even at the age of 4. Or were you 5
and
then?
I couldn't see anybody. So I continued taking the clothes out, took the basket downstairs, and I told my mom what I had seen. And she said, "That's okay. Nothing to worry about. It's not going to hurt you." And it immediately, in my mind, I said, so she knows about this. See?
And she wasn't bothered by any of this.
No, my mom, she had many experiences, and she told me about some of them. And no, she just, her belief in God was so strong that it didn't kill her. So I was thinking, well, that's great, but for me, I don't like it.
Well, tell about this first presence that you encountered. What was this presence doing when you saw her the next morning?
I'm not sure if I...
You don't remember what I'm referring to when you woke up in the morning and you saw the dresses moving?
Oh, yeah. Oh, jeez. See, it was funny because, in a way, being that I was asleep and I didn't have to go to school that day, my mom had closed the door. And I'm lying there in bed, and I'm looking in her closet, and her dresses were always hung a certain way, so that the sleeve on the right side was out. And it was like someone was going from dress to dress because the sleeve was being flipped up. And I'm lying there in the bed looking at this, and I'm saying, Cal, you don't need to be here. So my thought was, okay, we're going to hit this door. It's got to open.
And you were about 5 at the time.
Exactly. And I was, oh man, it's so funny now, because I was thinking, if that door don't open, I don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
That bothers me.
And what did your mom tell you about who this presence was?
Well, she told me that there was a lady who had previously owned the home, and she was a what do they call them?
A spinster. Spinster. Yeah.
Spencer, sorry. And she said that, she didn't interact with people outside very much or anything. Quiet, didn't bother anybody, but just she really didn't seem to have any friends. She lived alone.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom's thought was, this is who the person was. And believe me, I have no idea. All I knew is I didn't want to deal with it.
Right, and I don't blame you, because I recall reading in the book, didn't your mom say that this old lady loved to buy beautiful dresses?
Yes.
But I can understand most people don't really want to be near a ghostly presence, even if they're friendly and benign. So,
right.
But later on, after your mom kept telling you none of these are going to hurt you, you had a couple less benign experiences. Do you want to tell us about one or two of those?
Well, yeah. When my dad was, he was a 4 to 5 pack of unfiltered Camel cigarette smoker.
Mm-hmm.
And he was getting along in age. And the real problem was the fact that these cigarettes had taken a real toll on him.
Mm-hmm.
And he had been in the hospital. He'd been told he can't smoke anymore. But when you've been smoking for 40 or 50 years, you can tell the person that
it's almost impossible to stop at that point.
I knew he was, I just had a sense that he's not going to be here that much longer. And it started one night. I moved from my room upstairs to the downstairs because as a kid I was involved in a lot of athletic stuff, baseball, football, that sort of stuff. So my mom said, nobody uses the dining room. We don't need it for anything. So I'll give you that room and you can put all your stuff in various closets that I've got set up for you and so forth. And so I moved down there. And one night, not long after I had moved down there, I got in bed and I closed the door in my room, and then there's a door, 2 doors in the room, and the second door would lead you into our living room. And I happened to be kind of drifting off to sleep, and all of a sudden the door that was close to the kitchen slammed open for no reason. There's nobody down in that kitchen. It's just me downstairs, and it slams open, and I'm sitting up in bed, and it's dark because the lights are out, and I don't hear anything. I don't hear any footsteps, nothing. And I figure whatever this thing is, it's in this room with me. And I'm expecting something very bad to happen. But as I sat there, the next thing I knew, the door to the living room was snatched open. And it was kind of like locked halfway. And whatever this force was, it pulled it open and went into the living room. Now, I know this sounds a little crazy, but I decided I'm going to find out what I'm facing. And I walked to the door between my room, which was the old dining room, and the living room. And there was a end table right next to the door with a lamp on it, so I turned the lamp on. And in the chair that my dad usually sat to watch TV and smoke his cigarettes, the cushion in that chair was depressed. And I stood there looking at it, and for whatever reason, I kind of knew at that point, my dad is probably not going to be around very long.
And that turned out to be true, didn't it?
It did.
So And sometime
Yeah.
later, you also had a very, again, a very malignant experience while you were delivering your papers, and you were, what, about 12 at the time?
Yeah.
When this presence seemed to like almost throw a garbage can at you.
Yeah.
And you felt
Yeah.
this malignant presence. And you talk in the book about how you felt that this thing didn't like you and your mother. Do you want to kind of briefly tell what happened with that? And then I was curious, did this presence ever leave your house?
Um, that's a good question. I know that if we went back to that particular day,
Mm-hmm.
when I was delivering papers, this windstorm kicked up, and when you have a part of your brain that's dedicated to picking up stuff in the paranormal,
Mm-hmm.
there's no question you're going to know things. You just sense them.
Yeah.
And as I was delivering papers, and before I got to the house where this took place, I was thinking to myself, I know something's going to happen, but I don't know what it is. I just know something is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I was delivering these papers. The wind just seemed to get stronger and stronger as I moved from one street to the street that I was going to eventually be on, where this encounter would take place. And so I continued delivering my papers, and I got to the end of the next street. And when I got off my bike after parking my bike, brand new 55-gallon trash can, it's sitting there, and it elevated off the ground, and it was tossed.
And now you should clarify to my, at least 2,000, 3,000 listeners now, this was what, in the 1950s, so this was a big, huge metal garbage can, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
This wasn't like the plastic ones that you blow on them and they fall over. These were heavy.
It wasn't one of those, that's for sure. And that's what really caught my attention, because the weight of this thing, and to pick it up like that, the wind, even though it was strong, that it couldn't have happened just because of the wind.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew something was there. And as I turned around to look, there was the outline of this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew whatever it was not a positive force. I knew this was darkness. I don't know why it was there. I don't know why I encountered it, but it was there.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess at that point, my feeling was, the lady whose paper I was delivering had always been very good to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to deliver this paper. There's just no ifs, ands, and buts about it. So I decided I'm going to walk in to her area and deliver this paper, and that's that. Whatever happens is going to happen. And I knew this was like a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And as I walked in and put the paper down in front of her door and opened the screen door to go back out, this thing was gone.
Uh-huh.
And I was surprised, because I really expected it to attack me.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't, but it was there.
Right.
And it's something, you have encounters in life, and some of them, with time, they become blurred, and you may not remember it as well as you would have 10 years before something like that. This never went away. I've always remembered what happened.
Yeah.
And I always remember I expected an attack to come. It didn't. And I wondered what happened, why it didn't. And I thought about having gone to a Catholic school and going to church pretty regularly, that sort of thing. And I thought maybe all of that had something to do with it. But the other thing was, and and it may sound strange for a 12-year-old kid, there was a part of me that was really pissed off.
Mm-hmm.
That something like this was going to attack me, because the only thing I could think is it's a bully.
Right,
And
right.
that really sets me off.
Right.
Know?
But then you got home, and what happened?
Yeah. Got home.
There's more.
Got home that night. And as I was coming up the street with a buddy of mine, because in the book, we stopped off at this store where they had pinball machines,
mm-hmm.
and you could get milkshakes and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I had kind of put this incident behind me, and I walk in the house, and my mom, one of her best friends, a lady named Miss Lorraine, she asked me, had I been in the back porch?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was an odd question.
Yeah.
Because, I'm just getting home.
Right.
So I said, no, I'm just finishing up my paper route. And she looked at me and she said, are you sure?
Mm-hmm.
I said, yeah.
Of course I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, to me, a strange question, because why are you saying that?
Yeah.
And nothing had clicked upstairs at this point, because I had put that previous encounter behind me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I walked in, and my mother asked me, have you been in the back porch?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, no.
And you're getting nervous by now?
Yeah. By now, you're kind of like, something's going on.
Yep. And did you start thinking about this presence again?
Yeah.
Okay.
And when I walked into the back porch to put my bike up, my mom had a sewing table in the back porch. She used to sew and look out the big picture window that we had at the woods behind our home. And I walked in, and the next thing I knew was her sewing basket. And keep in mind, the floor is perfectly level.
Mm-hmm.
The sewing basket just rolled on its side onto the floor.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, man, that's strange.
Yeah.
So I picked the sewing basket up, put it back on the table, put my bike on the kickstand, and went in and sat down. And my mom was fixing dinner for me, and I sat down at the table. And her friend was there, and I was sitting there, and before I drank some milk, and before I got a fork full of food in my mouth, I heard this. We had this huge scrub pail in the back porch. I heard the scrub pail moving, and it was loud, really loud. And my mom said to me, "Are you sure you're not fooling around?"
And
again
at
was
this
a strange
point,
question,
right,
because I
especially
wasn't
when you're
a kid that was ever involved in pranks. It
well,
just
not
wasn't
to
my
mention
thing.
you're sitting at the table there, and she can see you're not doing it.
Right. And her friend looked at me and she said, "Calvin, are you sure?" I said, "Yes, ma'am, I am. I'm not doing anything." And so this noise continued. If you open the door, it stopped. If you close the door, it started up again.
And that's another thing that reminded me of the experience I had in the church, that if I opened or closed the door, it changed.
Yeah, exactly.
And I've heard other people tell similar stories too. In fact, my ex-husband, his family had a house like that, whereas they were moving out, one of the boys realized he had forgotten his keys. And as he opened the front door, he heard the sounds of a wild party in the room that he had left the keys in this empty house. So he's going down the hall hearing this wild party. He opened the door and it was completely silent. The room was empty. He crossed the hall, he picked up his keys, and the minute he shut the door behind him, the party erupted again. And obviously nobody in that room. So I guess, the other residents of that house were happy to have it to themselves.
It sounds like it.
Yeah.
Immensely fascinating, isn't it?
So do you have reason to think that this presence ever left the house? I mean, you lived there till you were what, 37?
Yeah.
And did it continue to
I have
bother you?
no idea. Nothing, it's funny, after my mom died, everything quieted down.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and the weird part about it, I think, was when I was moving out. I mean, it was the night that I moved out to go to my condominium I had purchased.
Mm-hmm.
Just about at the front door, and I heard, I was standing there, and I said, "Well, spirits of the house, it's all yours." And,
Uh-huh.
and I heard movement upstairs.
Uh-huh.
And I said, well, and I closed the door, and that was that.
Mm-hmm.
Again, there were things that happened off and on
Yeah.
in the home. And, I can't say that it was something I just accepted.
Mm-hmm.
But what I would say is I always had a feeling when something was going to transpire.
Mm-hmm.
And I think once you get used to that,
Right. It's interesting.
You're going to be reasonably comfortable, even
Yeah.
if you're not completely comfortable.
Right. Well, my son at college, he happens to go to the most, I think it's labeled one of the most haunted colleges in the United States. And in fact, my son is a resident assistant right now in the most haunted building in this most haunted of colleges, which he wasn't terribly thrilled about, but he hasn't said anything, so I guess nothing's happening. But he has a friend. Part of the reason your book intrigues me is because he has a friend that introduced himself, I think, the second morning they were at college. And his friend, like you, has been experiencing these things since he was very young. And the reason they met was because my son was in his room, and all of a sudden he just got this very, very dark, disturbing sense of something at his window. And he started saying the rosary, and it disappeared. And so, he didn't tell anyone about this. He was alone in his room at night, and he woke up in the morning to knock on his door, and there's this new guy, everybody's brand new to the college. And he's like, this may seem weird, but I see things. And he said, last night I saw something outside your window, like this kind of dark presence. And then all of a sudden it just fled and just ran. So, and when they compared times, he found out that when my son sensed this was exactly when this guy was outside. And, a few minutes later, when my son started saying the rosary, boom, whatever it was disappeared. And so, I realize in this day and age, a lot of people are going to say, oh, it's superstition. But he and his girlfriend just, covered the windows and the doors and the walls with holy water inside and out. And he had no more problem. So nothing happened. So, but one of the last questions I wanted to ask you before we wrap up is, certainly you must have thought over all these years of experiencing these things, why do some people sense these things and some people don't?
Well, my opinion on that, I really think it's biological.
Mm-hmm.
I think that some of our brains are configured in such a way as to be able to pick up on these things. I think people who don't probably don't have that configuration in terms of a brain structure.
Mm-hmm.
I really think that I'm not sure there's a good word for it, but I'll say uniqueness. I think there's a uniqueness about people like us who are able to perceive things that other people can't.
Yeah.
And I think that it's like a gradient level.
I was about to say,
people that, they're at a lower level with this. Some are in the middle and some are way off the chart.
Yeah, because when I listen to you and my son's friend talk about these things, it seems that many people might experience something once or twice in their life, but some people experience it much more strongly and much more frequently.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because like I
And
said,
in a way, it's a good thing because you really know when darkness is around.
mhm,
That incident that I had in my old apartment that I'm writing about,
mhm,
I still haven't been able to get rid of whatever followed me out of that apartment.
mhm,
Now, it's annoying in the sense that, for instance, if I turn on the TV, it makes noise into the speaker system, that sort of thing.
mhm,
And if I'm on the computer, again, if I have, the sound up on the speaker system, it makes noise into the speaker system.
mhm,
We have two huge TV screens in the computer room where I go to do my work.
mhm.
And when you're listening to TV, I don't know if other people can hear it, but I can hear it.
Yeah.
And I once asked one of the guys that I'm kind of friendly with here at my apartment complex, I said, do you hear that noise through the speaker system?
Mhm.
He said, yeah.
Uh-huh.
I'm wondering what it is. I mean, because I'd like to get it filtered out.
Mhm.
And I was kind of happy because someone had the perceptions that I have.
Right. Right.
And I suspect, because he's close to the, cuff kind of person,
Mhm.
and I have the sense that he may have had some experiences.
Mhm.
He just isn't going to talk about them.
Right.
And,
But
he's in his late 50s, early 60s.
mhm. And
So,
I'm looking forward to that book because you've told me more about that story in the past. And I know skeptics are going to go, oh, well, there's just a short in the speaker wires or something, but there's a lot more to that story, which makes it reasonable to think that's not what's going on, that there is something more. But so you don't have an author page. You're using Amazon right now as your author page, right?
right.
So Calvin Johnson, Inexplicable Occurrences, My Experiences with the Supernatural.